The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Captain Lydia Ghost. Thorne ran her fingers along the spine of a worn copy of Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. The irony wasn't lost on her. A woman who'd said her own farewell to arms 3 years ago, standing in the military history section of a suburban Barnes and Noble on a Tuesday afternoon. The pharmacy next door hummed with ordinary life, prescription pickups and cough drops, while she searched for something to fill the hollow hours between physical therapy appointments. She'd been reaching for another book when she felt them before she saw them, that particular stillness that only comes when trained operators move into position. Two soldiers in dress blues materialized behind her, their polished shoes reflecting the harsh store lighting. The taller one, a master sergeant with eyes like winter, spoke first. "Captain Thorne." "It's just Ms. Thorne now," she replied without turning around, though her spine had already straightened into the posture that 20 years of service had burned into her muscle memory. "Ma'am, that's not entirely accurate." The second soldier stepped forward, a lieutenant colonel with silver eagles that caught the light. "Your country needs you." Lydia finally turned, her left hand instinctively moving to where her flight suit pocket used to be, finding only the soft fabric of civilian jeans. The motion sent a familiar ache through her right shoulder, a souvenir from the ejection seat that had saved her life and ended her career in the same violent second. "I'm grounded, Colonel. Permanently. Medical Review Board made that crystal clear." "The situation has changed." He produced a tablet, its screen showing satellite imagery that made her breath catch. Aircraft formations she didn't recognize, moving in patterns that violated every international treaty she'd memorized. "These appeared over the Pacific 6 hours ago. Our best pilots have been scrambled. They're outmatched." She studied the footage, her mind automatically calculating intercept vectors, fuel loads, missile envelopes, the deadly mathematics that had once been her native language. "Then send more pilots." "We have." His voice carried the weight of decisions that cost lives. "We've lost 17 aircraft in the past 4 hours. The enemy technology is beyond anything in our current inventory, but their flight patterns—" He paused, touching the screen. "They're using tactics from the Balkans War, specifically tactics that countered something called Operation Nightfall." The book slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence between them. The bookstore continued its mundane rhythm around them, children selecting picture books, elderly couples debating bestsellers, but Lydia felt reality tilting on its axis. Operation Nightfall had been classified at levels that officially didn't exist. Only 7 people knew those tactics intimately enough to counter them. 6 were dead. "Ma'am," the master sergeant said quietly, "we need Ghost to fly again." Through the store's windows, she could see the afternoon sky, deceptively peaceful and blue. Somewhere beyond that tranquil horizon, the war she thought she'd left behind was calling her home. The weight of old flight wings pressed against her chest like a phantom limb. 3 years of physical therapy, of learning to sleep without dreams of burning cockpits, of building a life measured in coffee shop visits and bookstore afternoons. All of it suddenly felt like borrowed time that had just run out. She looked at the soldiers, these messengers from a world she'd tried to forget, and felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that no amount of civilian living could quite suppress. The sky was waiting. Her fingers found the dog tags she still wore beneath her sweater, warm metal against cooling skin. In the reflection of the colonel's tablet screen, she saw not the broken pilot who'd been wheeled out of a burning F-22, but the woman who'd earned her call sign by disappearing into enemy airspace and emerging with intelligence that changed the course of a war. "When do we leave?" The C-17 Globemaster's engines created a monotonous thunder that Lydia felt in her bones as she studied the classified briefing materials spread across the aircraft's fold-down table. Across from her, Colonel Marcus Kane, the man who'd found her in that bookstore, watched her with the careful attention of someone evaluating a volatile weapon. The other passengers, a mix of Pentagon officials and intelligence officers, maintained the careful distance that surrounded anyone being recalled from retirement for reasons they couldn't discuss. The enemy aircraft first appeared on radar at 3:47 Zulu, Kane said, his finger tracing positions on a tactical map. Formation of 12, flying in a pattern our analysts initially dismissed as random, until Captain Rodriguez recognized the signature. Lydia looked up from the technical specifications that made no sense, thrust ratios that violated physics, materials that shouldn't exist, weapons systems that belonged in science fiction. Rodriguez is dead. Killed over the Strait of Hormuz 2019, but before he died he transmitted something. Kane produced a voice recorder, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. Audio quality is poor, his radio was damaged, but listen. Static filled the cabin, punctuated by the desperate breathing of a pilot in combat. Then, through the white noise, Rodriguez's voice, tight with disbelief. Control, they're flying Nightfall counters. Repeat, enemy is using Nightfall defensive patterns. How the hell do they know Nightfall? The recording ended in static that might have been an explosion. Lydia's hands had stopped moving across the documents. Those tactics were compartmentalized. Need-to-know basis, eyes-only classification. We're aware. Kane's voice carried implications that settled like ice in her stomach. Which brings us to the real reason you're here. We believe someone with intimate knowledge of Nightfall is either compromised or, he paused, choosing his words carefully, or actively working with the enemy. She leaned back in her seat, feeling the familiar ache in her shoulder where the ejection seat had compressed her vertebrae. The irony tasted bitter, recalled not just to fly, but to hunt a traitor who knew her own tactics better than she remembered them herself. The other 6 pilots who knew Nightfall. Dead, all killed in action between 2019 and 2023. You're the sole survivor. The C-17 hit turbulence, and Lydia's hand instinctively gripped the armrest with the reflexes of someone who'd felt aircraft die beneath her. Through the small porthole, she could see the Pacific stretching endlessly below, its surface hiding the wrecks of 17 American fighters. 17 pilots who died fighting an enemy using her tactics against them. The aircraft I'll be flying. Kane slid another folder across the table. F-35A Lightning II, latest block upgrade. Not what you're used to, but it's what we have available for immediate deployment. She opened the folder, scanning specifications that read like a compromise between capability and desperation. After the knife-edge perfection of the F-22, the Lightning felt like trading a scalpel for a club. But she'd learned long ago that the weapon that mattered most was the mind guiding it. My squadron. You'll be flying with the 94th Fighter Squadron, call sign Hat Trick. They're good pilots, but young. Most have never seen real combat beyond training scenarios. Kane's expression suggested he understood exactly what he was asking of her. They'll follow your lead. The tablet showed her the faces of 6 pilots, all younger than her first combat deployment. Children playing at war, about to face an enemy that had already proven capable of killing seasoned veterans. The responsibility settled across her shoulders like an old flight suit, familiar and heavy. Kane leaned forward. Captain Thorne, I need to ask, is there anyone who might have had access to your mission records? Anyone who knew Nightfall well enough to teach it to an enemy? She met his eyes, seeing the question beneath the question. In the reflected light of the porthole, her own face looked older than her 42 years, marked by scars that went deeper than the visible ones along her hairline. Colonel, if I knew who was selling American pilots to die, do you think I'd be sitting in a bookstore reading Hemingway? Nellie's Air Force Base materialized through the heat shimmer of the Nevada desert like a mirage of purpose and steel. As the C-17 touched down, Lydia pressed her face to the porthole, and watched F-22s and F-35s taxi past in formations that spoke of urgent preparation. The base hummed with the controlled chaos that preceded deployment. Fuel trucks racing between aircraft, ground crews, working with the precision of people who knew that mistakes meant body bags. The moment she stepped onto the tarmac, the desert heat hit her like a physical blow, but beneath it was something else. The familiar cocktail of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the metallic tang of ordnance that meant home in ways her suburban apartment never had. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez met them at the aircraft, her weathered face showing the kind of respect reserved for legends and ghosts. "Captain Thorne, welcome back to the fight." Vasquez's handshake was firm, her voice carrying decades of experience shepherding pilots through preparations that might be their last. "Your aircraft is ready for inspection whenever you are." Kane checked his watch, a gesture that suggested schedules measured in hours rather than days. "The 94th Squadron is waiting in Briefing Room Alpha. They've been told you're their new flight leader. They haven't been told why." Lydia followed Vasquez toward a hangar whose open doors revealed the angular silhouette of an F-35A Lightning II, its gray skin seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. The aircraft looked predatory in the desert sun, all sharp angles and hidden weapons, but to her eyes it lacked the pure lethality of the Raptor. Still, it would have to do. Everything would have to do. "Ma'am," Vasquez's voice pulled her from her assessment. "The pilots are good kids. They've heard stories about Ghost, but they think they're just stories. Some of them figure you're here because you're connected somehow, not because you're qualified." "What do you think, Sergeant?" Vasquez smiled, the expression transforming her weathered features. "Ma'am, I've been working fighters for 30 years. I know the difference between politicians in flight suits and pilots who have seen the elephant. You've got the look." They walked through the hangar in comfortable silence, past technicians who glanced up from their work with the careful curiosity of people who recognize someone from briefings they couldn't discuss. The F-35's cockpit sat open like a mouth, its glass surfaces reflecting the overhead lights in patterns that seemed almost organic. Lydia ran her hand along the aircraft's skin, feeling the subtle texture of stealth coating beneath her palm. "She's beautiful," Vasquez said, watching Lydia's inspection with professional interest. "But different from what you're used to." "Different how?" "More forgiving. The Raptor demanded perfection. One mistake in physics would kill you before the enemy could. This one's built for pilots who need to learn from their errors." Vasquez paused. "Though from what I hear, you won't be making any." Through the hangar's open doors, the desert sky stretched endless and blue, marked only by the contrails of aircraft practicing formations they might never perfect. Somewhere beyond that horizon, an enemy waited with tactics stolen from her own playbook, using her knowledge to kill her countrymen. The tablet Kane had given her contained photos of wreckage pulled from the Pacific, twisted metal that had once been F-22s, scorched helmets that had protected pilots, whose names were still being withheld from their families. 17 good people, dead because someone had taught the enemy how to think like Ghost. She climbed the ladder to the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat with movements that her body remembered despite 3 years of civilian softness. The familiar embrace of restraint systems and life support connections felt like coming home to a house that had burned down and been rebuilt differently. Below her, Vasquez called up, "Ma'am, the squadron's waiting." Briefing Room Alpha held 6 pilots arranged around a conference table that had seen 1,000 mission briefings, their flight suits crisp with the confidence of youth and inexperience. They looked up as Lydia entered, and she could read their thoughts in the subtle shifts of posture and expression, surprise at her civilian clothes, skepticism at her presence, the careful politeness of subordinates meeting a superior they didn't understand. Lieutenant Jake "Cowboy" Morrison sat at the table's head, his call sign embroidered in gold thread that still looked factory new. Late 20s, probably top of his class at flight school with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been shot down. His smile was practiced political. "Ma'am, welcome to Hat Trick Squadron. We've heard stories." "What kind of stories, Lieutenant?" "Oh, you know." He gestured vaguely, his tone carrying the dismissive edge of someone explaining folklore. "Urban legends. The pilot who disappeared into enemy airspace for 3 days and came back with targeting data that ended a war. Flying so close to the ground that farmers thought they'd seen a UFO. That kind of thing." Captain Maria Phoenix Delgado, the only other woman in the room, shot Morrison a look that could have melted radar paint. "What cowboy means is that we're honored to have someone with your experience join the squadron, ma'am." Lydia pulled out a chair, noting how the younger pilots unconsciously leaned away, not from disrespect, but from the careful distance that military culture maintained around legends who might prove disappointingly human. "How many of you have combat experience?" The silence stretched long enough for the air conditioning to cycle through a full rotation. Finally, First Lieutenant David Torch Kim raised his hand halfway. "I flew CAP missions over Syria for 6 months, ma'am. Nothing eventful." "The rest of you?" More silence. These children, and at her age, that's what they were, had learned to fly in the relative peace that followed wars she'd helped to end. Their training had been thorough but theoretical, simulations and exercises that prepared them for everything, except the moment when the sky filled with real bullets meant to kill real people. Major Alina Saber Kozlov, the squadron's executive officer, cleared her throat. "Ma'am, with respect, we've all seen your service record. What we haven't seen is recent flight time. The F-35 is significantly different from the F-22, and there have been advances in enemy capabilities since your last deployment." The challenge hung in the air like cordite after a firing range session. Lydia could see the calculation in Kozlov's eyes, a squadron commander protecting her pilots from a has-been who might get them killed through outdated tactics or rusty reflexes. It was actually responsible leadership, which made it harder to resent. "You're right to be concerned, Major." Lydia stood, her movement creating subtle tension throughout the room. "I haven't flown combat in 3 years. I've been grounded by medical review for injuries that still wake me up at night. And I'm about to lead you into a fight against an enemy using tactics I developed, which means they know exactly how I think." She walked to the briefing room's window, looking out at the flight line where aircraft sat in formations that suggested imminent departure. "But here's what you need to understand. 6 hours ago, 17 American pilots died over the Pacific because someone taught the enemy how to counter everything you've been trained to do. They're not just flying advanced aircraft, they're flying them like they've been inside our heads." The room had gone completely quiet. "So you can question my qualifications, my fitness, my relevance to modern warfare. But while you're deciding whether I belong here, remember that every minute we spend in doubt is another minute they're preparing to kill you using tactics I could counter in my sleep." The pre-flight briefing began at 5:30, the sky outside still star-drunk and navy blue. Lydia stood at the front of the room, her flight suit feeling strange after years of civilian clothes, the fabric stiff with newness and smelling of factory chemicals rather than the lived-in scent of actual combat. Behind her, a large screen displayed satellite imagery that looked like a child's drawing of naval warfare. Scattered ships, aircraft formations that made no tactical sense, and gaps in the intelligence that suggested either sensor failure or something moving too fast to track. "At 400 this morning, the enemy formations advanced to within 200 miles of the Hawaiian Islands," she began, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd briefed missions in hangars that no longer existed. "Current disposition, 12 confirmed aircraft, possibly more using stealth technology we haven't encountered before. Speed and altitude capabilities unknown. Weapons systems unknown. Intent," she paused, "unknown, but their bearing suggests Pearl Harbor." Lieutenant Morrison raised his hand. "Ma'am, what's our mission profile?" "Intercept and assess. We establish contact, determine capabilities, and report back. Under no circumstances do we engage unless fired upon first. Captain Delgado frowned, her fingers drumming against her flight helmet. With respect, ma'am, if these aircraft are using captured American tactics, shouldn't we assume hostile intent? It was a fair question from someone too young to remember when assumptions had led to friendly fire incidents that destroyed careers and lives. Lydia studied the faces around her, seeing the hunger for action that burned in every fighter pilot's chest, the desire to prove themselves against something more dangerous than training scenarios and air show performances. Phoenix, how many enemy aircraft have you shot down? None, ma'am. Cowboy. Also none, ma'am. She turned to each pilot in turn, receiving the same answer, watching their confidence dim as they realized what she was revealing. I've shot down 11 enemy aircraft in 4 different conflicts. Every one of those kills taught me something about dying. The most important lesson is this: the moment you assume you know what the enemy will do, you've already lost. Major Kozlov stood, her expression tight with the frustration of a career officer watching a stranger reshape her squadron's doctrine in real time. Captain Thorne, our pilots have trained extensively in threat assessment and enemy engagement protocols. They understand the risks. Do they? Lydia moved to the tactical display, her finger tracing the enemy's approach vector. Because this formation is flying a modified version of something called the Sarajevo Spiral, a technique developed in 1994 to counter specific NATO air superiority tactics. The last time anyone flew this pattern was over Kosovo in 1999. She could feel the temperature in the room shift as the implications settled. Morrison's practiced smile had disappeared entirely. The pilot flying lead on this formation learned these tactics from someone who was there, someone who understood not just what we do, but how we think while we're doing it. She turned back to face her squadron, seeing her own realization reflected in their eyes. We're not just fighting advanced technology, we're fighting ourselves. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up on the flight line. Other squadrons preparing for missions they might not understand, pilots checking systems that might not be enough. The F-35's cockpit embraced Lydia like a familiar stranger, its surfaces both alien and instinctively understood. Her hands moved through the pre-flight sequence with muscle memory that transcended the differences between aircraft. Each switch and display calling forth routines burned into her nervous system by thousands of hours in the air. The helmet felt heavier than she remembered, its weight pressing against vertebrae that protested with sharp reminders of that last ejection. Ghost, this is Tower. Radio check over. Her voice found its professional cadence without conscious effort. Tower, Ghost. Radio check 5x5, ready for taxi clearance. Through the canopy, she could see the rest of Hat Trick Squadron performing their own pre-flight rituals. Cowboy adjusting his seat position for the 3rd time. Phoenix running through her weapons systems checklist with the methodical precision of someone trying to perfect the imperfectible, Torch staring at his tactical display, with the intensity of a student cramming for an exam that would be graded in life and death. The tower's response crackled through her headphones. Ghost, cleared to taxi runway 27, winds light and variable. Current time 6:15 local. As her F-35 rolled toward the runway, Lydia caught sight of the ground crews watching from the hangar doors. Some waved with the casual familiarity of people sending friends off to work. Others stood in small groups, their body language suggesting conversations about odds and probabilities that no one wanted to voice aloud. Hat Trick Flight, this is Ghost, she transmitted on the squadron frequency. Form up in combat spread, maintain radio discipline until we reach the operational area. Remember, our job is to gather intelligence, not to win medals. Save the heroics for the movies. Copy, Ghost. Morrison's voice carried a note of something that might have been resentment. Hat Trick 2, moving to position. The squadron fell into formation with the practiced ease of hundreds of training flights, their aircraft becoming extensions of will and intention against the morning sky. But Lydia could sense the tension radiating from her wingmen, the hypervigilance of people heading into their first real fight, when everything they'd learned would either prove sufficient or prove fatal. As they climbed through 20,000 feet, the Pacific stretched below them like hammered steel, its surface broken only by the wakes of ships that looked like toys from altitude. The beauty of it was deceptive. Somewhere in that vast expanse, an enemy waited with knowledge that should have been impossible to possess. "Ghost, this is AWACS Overlord." A new voice filled her headphones. "We have intermittent contacts bearing 270, range approximately 400 miles. Contacts appear to be maneuvering in defensive formations." Lydia checked her tactical display, watching as ghostly symbols appeared and disappeared at the edge of sensor range. "Overlord Ghost, can you confirm aircraft type?" "Negative Ghost, radar signature is unusual. Recommend caution on approach." She switched to the squadron frequency. "Hat Trick, you heard the man. We're going in quiet and careful. Maintain formation integrity and keep your eyes open for anything that doesn't belong." Below them, the Pacific continued its eternal rhythm of waves and wind, indifferent to the drama playing out in the sky above. But Lydia could feel something else now, a presence at the edge of perception, like the moment before lightning when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The first contact appeared on Lydia's radar as a ghost whisper of reflection, there and gone before the computer could establish a lock. She blinked hard, checking her instruments with the paranoid precision of someone who'd learned that survival often depended on trusting machines more than intuition. The contact flickered back into existence, stronger this time, moving in a pattern that made her breath catch in recognition. "Hat Trick Ghost, contact bearing 265 Angels 20, single aircraft, possible reconnaissance." "Ghost Cowboy, I'm not seeing anything on scope." She double-checked her display, watching the contact maintain a steady bearing that suggested either surveillance or preparation for something larger. "Cowboy, check your ECM settings. Switch to combat mode and scan again." The seconds stretched while Morrison adjusted his electronic warfare systems, the silence filled with the steady hum of engines and the whispered breathing of pilots learning to fight. When his voice returned, it carried a note of surprise that made her stomach tighten. "Ghost, I've got him now. How did you?" Morrison's transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the harsh static of jamming. "Hat Trick Flight, we're being painted." Major Kozlov's voice cut through the interference. "Multiple active sensors, direction unknown." Lydia's threat warning system erupted in a cascade of beeps and warnings that transformed her cockpit into a symphony of electronic panic. But beneath the chaos, she could hear something else, the specific frequency modulation of radar patterns she'd encountered over the Balkans, updated with technology that shouldn't exist. "All aircraft implement Serpent Protocol, break formation and go defensive." The squadron scattered like startled birds, their aircraft diving and climbing in evasive patterns that turned the orderly formation into a complex ballet of survival. Through her canopy, Lydia could see Phoenix pulling into a vertical climb that left contrails scratched against the blue sky like desperate calligraphy. "Ghost AWACS, we're reading 12, no, correction, 18 contacts now airborne and closing your position. Estimate intercept in 8 minutes. 18. The number hit her like a physical blow. Intel had suggested 12 aircraft maximum, but 18 meant either their estimates were catastrophically wrong or the enemy had been holding reserves for exactly this moment. She adjusted her heading toward the intercept, her mind automatically calculating fuel loads, weapons ranges, and the grim mathematics of 6 against 18. "Hat Trick, form up on me. Combat spacing, weapons free." "Ma'am," Torch's voice carried the tight control of someone fighting panic. "Weapons free. I thought we were reconnaissance only." The first missile launch appeared on her display as a bright symbol, accelerating toward Phoenix's aircraft. Lydia watched the symbology with the detached precision that came from too much experience, automatically noting the missile's performance characteristics even as she keyed her radio. Phoenix break right, missile inbound bearing 090. Delgado's F-35 rolled into a punishing turn that would have grayed out a civilian, her aircraft dispensing chaff and flares in patterns that turned the sky into a festival of deception. The missile, whatever it was, adjusted its course with the fluid grace of advanced artificial intelligence, closing the distance with mechanical determination. Phoenix status. Ghost, I'm clean. Whatever that was, it just stopped tracking. Delgado's voice carried bewilderment that mirrored Lydia's own confusion. Missiles didn't just stop tracking, not unless they were programmed to do something else entirely. On her radar display, the enemy formation had shifted into a pattern she recognized with growing horror. The Mosaic Defense, a formation designed to funnel attacking aircraft into specific engagement zones while maintaining escape routes for the defenders. She developed it during the Balkans War to counter numerically superior forces. They weren't just using her tactics, they were using them perfectly. The enemy aircraft revealed themselves like wolves emerging from winter fog, their angular silhouettes unlike anything in NATO recognition manuals. Lydia's first clear visual contact came as her F-35 crested 28,000 feet, and what she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about aerospace engineering. The aircraft moved with fluid grace that suggested either revolutionary propulsion systems or physics she didn't understand. Ghost visual on lead bandit. Jesus Christ, what is that thing? Morrison's voice carried the raw shock of someone whose training had just collided with reality. Through her own canopy, Lydia could see the lead aircraft, sleek as a shark, dark as shadow, with control surfaces that seemed to shift and flow rather than simply adjust. It flew with the lazy confidence of a predator that had never known fear. Hat trick, maintain formation discipline, she transmitted, though her own pulse hammered against her throat like an engine approaching redline. Remember your training. Identify capabilities before engagement. The enemy formation split with choreographed precision, their aircraft flowing into the exact pattern she'd used to destroy a Serbian fighter wing in 1999. But they'd improved it, refined it, turned her own innovation into something deadlier than she'd ever imagined possible. Ghost Saber, these bastards know exactly what they're doing. Kozlov's aircraft had fallen into trail position, her F-35 painting the enemy formation with targeting radar that returned information that made no sense. The computers couldn't classify what they were seeing, aircraft that registered as both metal and something else, signatures that flickered between stealth and conventional, speeds that violated known performance envelopes. All aircraft switch to Tango frequency, Lydia ordered, shifting to the encrypted channel reserved for combat communications. From this point forward, assume all standard frequencies are compromised. The enemy lead aircraft banked toward them with movements that seemed almost organic, its form shifting subtly as control surfaces adjusted in ways that suggested biomechanical inspiration. As it closed range, Lydia could see details that her rational mind rejected, surfaces that seemed to ripple like liquid metal, exhaust signatures that looked more like controlled lightning than conventional thrust. Ghost, I'm getting a locked tone. Negative torch, do not engage. We're here to learn, not to start World War III. But even as she said it, Lydia's thumb found the weapons selector on her stick, cycling through air-to-air missiles with the automatic response of someone whose survival had depended on those weapons for 2 decades. The enemy aircraft continued its approach, now close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy, a figure in what looked like conventional flight gear, disturbingly human despite the alien technology surrounding them. Then the enemy pilot did something impossible. The aircraft stopped, Not slowed, not turned, not adjusted course, stopped, hanging in the air like a helicopter despite having no visible rotors, no downward thrust, nothing that explained how several tons of metal and fuel could simply decide to ignore gravity. All aircraft break now. Her squadron scattered again, their formation dissolving into individual fights for survival, as the enemy aircraft demonstrated capabilities that belonged in science fiction. Phoenix's F-35 rolled through a defensive spiral that would have torn the wings off conventional aircraft, while Cowboy pulled into a climb so steep his engine should have flamed out from lack of airflow. Through it all, the enemy lead aircraft hung motionless in the sky like a dark star, its pilot watching their evasive maneuvers with the patience of someone studying insects under glass. The dogfight that followed broke every rule Lydia had learned about air combat, transforming the sky into a three-dimensional chess match where the enemy seemed to know her moves before she made them. Her F-35 pulled through a defensive split test that painted gray across her vision, G-forces pressing her into the ejection seat with familiar brutality, while her aircraft dove toward the Pacific's surface in search of maneuvering room. "Ghost, bandit closing from your 6. Phoenix's voice cut through the tactical frequency, tight with the controlled panic of someone watching a friend about to die. Lydia reversed her dive into a climbing spiral that would have been impossible in the F-22, the F-35's fly-by-wire systems compensating for maneuvers that should have departed controlled flight. Through her mirrors, she could see the pursuing aircraft, not following her movements but anticipating them, positioning itself where she would be rather than where she was. "He's flying my defensive patterns," she transmitted, rolling inverted to change the geometric relationship. "Switch to offensive tactics, confuse his predictions." But the enemy pilot adjusted instantly, flowing into a counterattack sequence that she recognized with growing dread. It was the Sarajevo Gambit, a high-risk maneuver she developed to break stalemate situations by accepting temporary disadvantage to create long-term opportunity. The enemy wasn't just using her defensive tactics, they were using her aggressive innovations as well. Hat trick 2, going vertical. Morrison's F-35 pulled into a climb that sacrificed energy for altitude, trying to gain the high ground that had dominated air combat since the Wright brothers first left the Earth. The pursuing enemy aircraft followed with movements that seemed to mock the limitations of conventional physics, climbing at angles that should have caused compression stalls, while maintaining speeds that violated everything Lydia understood about thrust-to-weight ratios. "Cowboy, he's going to overshoot. When he does, roll left and dive. Use gravity to build energy." But the enemy aircraft didn't overshoot. Instead, it matched Morrison's climb perfectly, then executed a maneuver that Lydia had seen only once before, in her own gun camera footage from a classified mission over Montenegro. The pursuing aircraft simply reversed direction in mid-flight, transitioning from climb to dive without any apparent loss of energy or control. "Ghost, how did he? That's impossible." Nothing's impossible if you know the physics. But even as she said it, Lydia felt a chill that had nothing to do with altitude. The enemy pilot wasn't just using her tactics. They were using techniques she'd never shared with anyone, maneuvers that existed only in her own combat reports and personal flight logs. Her threat warning system screamed as multiple aircraft achieved missile lock simultaneously, the sound creating a wall of electronic panic that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. On her display, she could see her squadron, 6 bright symbols representing 6 lives she was responsible for, all caught in a trap that was closing with mechanical inevitability. "All aircraft implement mirror protocol. Use their own formations against them." It was desperation disguised as tactics, but sometimes desperation was all that separated the living from the dead. Mirror protocol meant copying the enemy's movements exactly, turning their advantages into mutual disadvantage through perfect mimicry. The maneuver worked for exactly 30 seconds before the enemy adapted, shifting into formations that countered mirror protocol with the smooth efficiency of a machine that had been programmed to expect exactly this response. Whoever was teaching them didn't just know her tactics, they knew her mind. The missile that nearly killed Torch came without warning, materializing on the threat display like a digital death sentence, accelerating toward his aircraft at Mach 4. Lydia watched the symbology converge, with the helpless precision of someone whose training had taught her to calculate exactly how many seconds remained before impact. Torch brake left, missile, missile, missile. Lieutenant Kim's F-35 rolled into evasive maneuvers that turned his aircraft into a tumbling leaf, chaff and flares streaming behind him in a desperate constellation of countermeasures. The missile adjusted its course with fluid grace, tracking through his defensive spiral with the relentless patience of guided death. Ghost, I can't shake him. Lydia threw her aircraft into a knife-edge turn that brought her around behind the incoming missile, her targeting system struggling to achieve lock on a target moving faster than her weapons could track. The geometry was impossible. Intercepting a missile with another missile required precise timing and perfect positioning, variables that were shifting too rapidly for human calculation. She fired anyway, launching an AIM-120 AMRAAM on instinct and mathematics learned in combat that existed only in her muscle memory. The missile accelerated away from her aircraft, its exhaust trail scribing a line of hope across the sky as it raced to intercept death itself. The collision occurred at a combined closure rate that turned both missiles into expanding clouds of superheated metal and explosive force. The shockwave hit Torch's F-35 hard enough to crack his canopy, but he was alive, his aircraft still flying, still fighting. Thanks, Ghost, I owe you a beer. Stay focused, Torch, this isn't over. But even as she said it, Lydia could see the enemy formation regrouping for another attack, their aircraft moving with the coordinated precision of a pack that had learned to hunt together. On her radar display, the symbology painted a picture of